When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet. But she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a, "Thanks, I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me." When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words. So I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth." And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up at around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy segue into the topic, but I just said sure, and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she startled doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it, to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received in 40-plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between, "Hi, how are you?" to, "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. At 17 years old, I was on the hunt for my very first car. Craigslist became my daily destination as I searched for a simple set of wheels to take me from point A to point B. I wasn't after anything fancy, just a reliable beater car that could do the job. With a budget capped at $3,000, I set my sights on cars no newer than 2003 or 2004. I found an ad one day for a 2002 two-door Ford. It was listed for $2,000 and the mileage was under 80,000. So right away I knew I wanted to check it out. The person who posted the ad lived a few towns over from us, a 20-minute drive on the highway. I convinced my mom to drive me out there to view the car after conversing with the guy over the phone. Originally, I texted him asking for details, but he ended up calling me. He sounded basically normal over the phone, actually rather polite. He answered some questions I had about the car and whatnot, and when he asked for my name and I told him Joe, he said, "Joe, what a great name. That's my name too." I laughed because it was the polite thing to do, but I just found it to be such an odd comment. Like everything about it, it almost sounded like he forgot his name was Joe because of the pause between, "What a great name," and "That's my name." It just sounded sketchy. Nevertheless, everything else about the call went fine. So the next day, my mom drove me to the address the guy gave me. Getting off the highway and onto the streets, right away we agreed this was a trashy-looking neighborhood. Bars on windows, graffiti under bridges. I was hoping the guy's place wouldn't seem equally sketchy. But as we pulled up, it was. It wasn't a standard property like the rest in the area. The entrance to the property was between two houses. It wasn't a driveway, just some low-key road that led into an inlet with two more houses. Every house was cramped between other houses and buildings. But there I saw it. The Ford, which was in my guess what you'd call the driveway for this house. My mom and I stepped up to the front door and rang the bell. We didn't know if it rang or not because we couldn't hear anything, so I knocked. One of the windows opened out of nowhere and a man's voice said to come inside. The door's unlocked. I went to open the door and my mom stopped me and whispered, "Are you sure you want to go in there?" I said yeah. I let ourselves in, expecting to be greeted by Joe. The inside of this place was kind of dark. Not a lot of natural light came in through the minimal windows. "Hello," I said. "Yeah, over here," a voice called. It was a deeper voice than I heard on the phone. "Joe?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. I began walking through the little kitchen closer to his voice. My mom grabbed my shoulder and stopped me. She whispered in my ear, "We're leaving." The man's voice now came from beyond this door at the end of the kitchen. He called, "Hurry up down here, we could do the transaction here." My mom and I left the house in a hurry. As we were hurrying to my car, a lady at the next building over called to us. She came hurrying down from her front porch, warning us not to go in there. Then she asked why we were there, and we explained that I came to buy a car, but that he was calling us into his basement. The woman said that she's been concerned about that man living next door for months, that she thinks he's up to no good, and that he constantly has random cars pull up in the driveway in the middle of the night. We asked if his name was Joe. She said she wasn't sure, but that she vaguely remembered the guy introducing himself as Mike. She told us to just get far away from the house immediately, and so we did. It's disturbing to know my mom and I may have been murdered in that basement if we went down there. Like, how could we do a transaction before even viewing the car or agreeing on anything? Better question, why in the basement? The whole thing screams trap. I don't know what else he could have wanted to do to us, more specifically me, in that basement. Was moving out of an apartment that had washer and dryer hookups into one that did not. So I sold my washer and dryer. Ended up having separate buyers. Guy who bought the dryer was great. He was getting it for his daughter who was going to college. I helped him load it up in his truck, he gave me the payment, and I never heard from him again. The guy who bought the washer was a different story. I got a text from him asking if it was still available. We haggled the price, all normal stuff. We set a time and I waited for him to get there. Now I only had 1 week left in the apartment, so I didn't care too much about random people coming to my home like I normally would. Pretty much all of my stuff was moved into my new place, but the internet wasn't turned on yet, so I was still just sleeping on an air mattress in the old one for the time being. He ended up being a few hours late and showed up in a truck that was used for transporting large glass panes. He had like 5 people with him, all crammed onto the front bench seat of the truck. They loaded it onto the truck with it leaning at a 30-degree angle against the glass pane rack, or whatever you would call it. He tried to haggle it down to a lower price, but I didn't budge. He left and I thought it was done. Later that night, I start getting texts from him about how it doesn't work and he wants his money back. I told him as it was written in the post that it was sold as is and was working. I assume he damaged it in the way he rigged it on his truck. Well, after a day, he starts calling me and cussing me out, texting death threats, and I have other random numbers calling me doing that same. 2 nights after I sold it, I wake up at 3 a.m. with people banging on my door yelling. Luckily, I lived on the 2nd floor with no easy access to the windows. I sat there for about 15 minutes while they continues to yell through the door. The next day, I moved the rest of my stuff into my new apartment and never went back other than to turn the keys in. I still got calls and texts from him on random numbers for 2 months over $1.150 washer. I don't sell stuff on Craigslist anymore.